Sometimes horrible things happen, and sometimes they happen in childhood. Can stories really help children suffering from grief and trauma? Hey there, Space Cats, it's me, Jules, author and illustrator, mainly of picture books, but I also stray into slightly older age groups too. I love my job. It's one of my purposes in life. But besides being a jolly nice way of spending some time, I wanted to think about whether stories can really help children who are traumatised. There are lots of traumas that children can experience, from losing a parent or a loved one, to abuse, or even something seemingly insignificant like losing the family goldfish. Childhood trauma is something that I have experience with, as when I was just coming up to my 6th birthday, my older sister died. She was 19, she was happily in a relationship and newly pregnant, and she came back to visit me and my family, my mum and dad and my 2 older brothers for the weekend. We just moved in fairly recently to a new area. She and my brothers went out for the evening, and on her way home with her partner, she was run over by a drunk driver and killed. As you can probably imagine, it was absolutely devastating for my family. My parents were heartbroken, and my brothers too. None of us really knew what had hit us. I was the youngest in my family by quite a long shot. My brothers were 15 and 17. It must have been really hard for my parents to know how to handle our emotions as well as their own. It was confusing, bewildering, and just completely disorientating. The one thing that seemed to really help me was story making. I was really into Cindy dolls, not Barbie dolls, and I used to have my Cindy family and make up different stories about normal life, just going on picnics, or my ice skating Cindy taking part in some sort of amazing gala. They were having a happy life when things around me were kind of strange and stony. And if there's one really nice thing that I can take away from my childhood, it was my dad reading stories to me every night when he got home from work. This went on till I was about 10 years old. Reading a story to me was a way of normalising something that clearly was not normal. It was a pressure-free time. Him not having to think, me not really having to ask awkward questions about what it means to die. We pretty much read everything that Roald Dahl wrote. My favourite at the time was Danny the Champion of the World. But we read other books as well, like The Borrowers, Black Beauty. The Owl Who's Afraid of the Dark was a great one. And also later on, when I could read more myself, the Nancy Drew mysteries. So why do children find such comfort from stories? Firstly, whatever the situation that they have experienced or that they're stuck in can be shelved and parked just for a short while. It's almost as if they can take on another existence. When you read a book, you're not just deciphering the letters and trying to figure out what the words are. You've got an image running through your head. You've got a film going on. A good story will help a child to imagine the characters and the plot and the setting, and immersing their brain in that just helps them to stop thinking about the thing that has traumatised them, even if it's just for a moment. A story that has a similar theme or events to the one that the child has suffered helps them to process the circumstances that surround them. Let's take Danny the Champion of the World. His mother died when he was only 9 weeks old, I think it was. So he not only is suffering from grief of losing a parent, but also the frustration and anger of never knowing his mum and never being able to know her. This can be really helpful if a child is in a similar situation. It makes them realise that they're not the only one going through it, and that whatever they're feeling is pretty normal. It gives them permission to feel sad or lonely or angry, or a whole host of other grieving emotions. Stories help children communicate their feelings around trauma. It can be used in formal therapy. For example, if a child has been abused, then the police or social services might use stories to help extract any of the details without being too in their face about it. But if it's something that's perhaps a little less desperate than that, it can start a discussion within the family. Let's go back to the goldfish. Mum and Dad might be thinking, oh, thank goodness I haven't got to clean that blinking tank out again. But to the child, it might be their first experience of death. They might have found the goldfish floating in the tank and might have found that extremely upsetting and distressing. So stories can help tell what had happened to the fish. Perhaps Mum and Dad can explain in the way of using a story that, this is what has happened, but also what will happen next. And perhaps using fantasy or folk tales, what could have happened to their fish in terms of its spirit. Perhaps it's crossed the fishy rainbow bridge. To make up a story about their fish is a good way to help them understand what's happened and also to soothe their fears. Children often have more ability to understand things than adults will give them credit for. But they need the chance to work through the experience. My lovely mum and dad told me initially that my sister had died from a pain because they were trying to save me from any further trauma. However, the story that I made up in my mind was that if I had a pain, I might die. And that meant if I had a tummy ache or fell over and grazed my knee, was that the beginning of the end for me? If I had been delicately given a little bit more information, then my story would have been very different. I am not blaming my mum and dad. They were doing their best in an extraordinarily difficult situation, and it's not something that they were ever prepared for or learned how to cope with. But the best thing about this experience is that it taught me that usually telling children the truth, albeit in a very soft and gentle way, is usually the best thing to do. Storytelling slows down the pace of life. Whether you might be scrolling through endless amounts of social media, or fast cooking your dinner in the microwave, or whizzing off to the next thing that you must do, gently having a story together forces you to stop and be together for that moment. This is really beneficial to both child and adult, because if the child has suffered a trauma, then it's likely to have had an effect on the adult as well. Stories can help cement this moment in time for you together, and it really can be incredibly beneficial to both of you. Stories can help reconnect traumatised children with the brighter side of life. Uplifting stories can have such a valuable effect on children's mental health and can be quite a good healer. Instead of reading stories around the same theme or events of the trauma, if you use something like folk tales or fantasy that are far removed from the distress that the child has suffered, it will give them some respite. Making up a story with the child can be really transformative. Let's say your little preschooler has had a massive falling out with their best friend and they just are absolutely beside themselves. Mum or Dad could retell the experience as they understand it, using words for emotions. For example, Chloe was really sad that Jake wouldn't play with her today. And then maybe Mum or Dad could help make an ending to that story. Chloe made up a terrific new game that Jake wanted to play, and Jake asked if he could come and join in. Chloe said yes and made space for him. This helps the child to process what they could do in that situation. These are just a few of my thoughts on stories and healing. If you're a fledgling author and you're just about to start your first ever book, please don't think that you have to write a book that's going to heal every child. Believe me, the story that's in you will find its way to the right audience and the right children, and they will come up and talk to you about it. You'll be amazed. If you want to see a video on why reading to children is important, I'm going to link it up the top here. And I'd like to say an especial big thank you to my storytelling extraordinaire chum, Sue Bailey, from But That's Another Story, whose exceptional experience in storytelling has helped inform this video. I will link her website below in the description. If you'd like further artist tutorials, I have a variety of short courses that will help you. There are real-time sessions looking at painting, drawing and marker pens, among others. And if you're keen on producing your own book, there is a more in-depth course on what you need to know about self-publishing a book with illustrations. And that covers making key decisions, how to make layouts and dummy books, rhythm and pacing, as well as several tutorials on illustrating your book, and a look at the tech. You can either hop over to my website or join me on Patreon for more information. Go on, give it a go! Phew, well that was a heavy one. Watch out, next week it's going to be an awful lot lighter. I'm going to do a draw with me. I'm not going to tell you what it is. I do know, I have remembered, but it's going to be a surprise. I am off to lie in a dark room. Look after yourselves. I will see you next week. Nanu nanu.